Hello, everyone. I want to make sure I'm not too close to the mic. So I'm not going to have any slides other than, well, I didn't know my face would be up there, but it's okay. I just won't look. So what do I mean by a homogeneous workforce? It's really a workforce with a lack of diversity, sameness. And for cybersecurity, this is particularly critical. So there are particular risks when it comes to a cybersecurity team that involve having a lack of diversity on the team. Our adversaries are diverse. They come from every corner of the globe, and it is important that we mitigate the risk of groupthink, blind spots that are very common with a homogeneous workforce. And actually, they've done studies that workforces that don't have enough diversity on them, or teams, are more error prone. And so when I say groupthink, what I'm talking about is it stifles creativity and innovation. Everybody wants to be the same or wants to be accepted into the group, and therefore there is no dissent. This is probably one of the worst things for a cybersecurity team because, again, our adversaries come from every corner of the globe, and studies have shown that actually the gender gap in cybercrime has reduced significantly. Criminals are less concerned with the gender, the ethnicity, and every other type of diversity. When I say diversity, I'm talking about ageism, differently abled, sexual orientation, gender, all of it. They're less concerned with that than making sure they have somebody who can do the job right. In that case, when we're talking about cybercrime, the criminal job right. So they are getting a more diverse population. They have more innovative thinking, more creative ways of hacking into systems, creating malware, being our adversaries. They're better supervillains, to use a comic book phrase. And we need to be better by creating more diverse teams. So what exactly are we facing? What does this diversity discrepancy look like? Well, one of the references that I'm going to use, and if anybody's interested in the sources of information for this, I'd be happy to share it with you afterwards. The ICS.org organization did a huge multicultural cybersecurity report. They also did one on women in cybersecurity report. And what they found was when we look at IT, about 40% of the population now is female. So there's significant strides there. But when we look at cybersecurity, that drops significantly. And 75 to 78% are male, and then whatever the remaining percentage is female. And obviously we see this. I am a Latin and indigenous woman who works in cybersecurity. I've been in there for like 10 years, and I can tell you that I approach problems differently than some of my Caucasian male counterparts, or even just male counterparts, and other ethnic males on the team approach it differently. That's super critical to what we're doing and what we're facing in the world. Everybody's background is different, right? And so you bring your own unique perspective to problem solving. I would even go so far as to socioeconomically, they talk about necessity being the mother of invention. When you grow up with a socioeconomic challenge, you learn to get very creative and inventive at finding solutions. And that's also another big, I guess I'd say, blocker to entry into cybersecurity is access to the technology, right? But going back to the stats, when we look at ethnicity from this study, what we find is about 64% is Caucasian, and then approximately 25 to 26% is ethnic, and that's just the big lump sum. If you break it down into Asian, African American, or Black, Latino, and Indigenous, the numbers just keep getting smaller and smaller. I think Asian is the only category that gets really close to a double digit, like almost a 10, but not quite. Yes, exactly. But all the other ones are single digit numbers. So I already told you my background. I don't even think somebody who looks and fits that description is calculable at that point in those, stats. And then they have a category that's other. And so that's just everybody else they didn't want to call out. The other thing they found is they found a very small percentage of LGBTQ plus, and they also found it impossible to measure differently abled people or disabled individuals because it's just not there. And so this is where it goes back to, they talk about representation mattering, and it does, because if people can't see themselves, if they don't see someone like themselves in teams, in a workforce, it's very difficult to get them into that workforce. So what does diversity give us? What are the upsides to diversity? Well, diverse teams are far more creative, studies have shown. They're more innovative. They also have a tendency to be more profitable for the company because of that creativity and innovation. Everything's interlinking at this point with the diversity of the team. When we look at the teams from that's always a selling point with companies, more profitable, at least in the States where I'm from, that's a big deal. But it also helps reduce turnover, which is a significant cost in IT. Turnover ends up costing, in the tens of millions or even billions, depending on the year. And then you have the massive risk of the knowledge gaps that get lost in the process. And so the positive aspect is if you can reduce your turnover, you're lowering your expenditure, you're increasing your profitability, you're building stronger teams, and you're mitigating your risk of the knowledge gap occurring. So it feels like a big win. So as we go further into this, one of the other problems that we're encountering as a whole in cybersecurity is a workforce gap. Worldwide, the gap for cybersecurity professionals is approximately 1.27 million. That's a lot. In the States alone, that gap is 500,000. So that's how many people we're missing to fill all the roles we need to. So when you think about it from we don't have enough diversity, we have this big workforce gap, they kind of feel like they should answer each other, right? Well, we expand it, we're going to get a bigger workforce, but herein lies another root cause problem. The pipelines we currently have built for cybersecurity just aren't reaching these diverse populations. They're not built for that. They're exclusionary. They're not taking into account, when we think about a lot of ethnic populations, there's socioeconomic barriers, which means there's barriers to the technology. And I'll use a very personal example. I've been in cybersecurity for about 10 years, and I've been working with cybersecurities for longer than that. Many times I'm working with the engineers, and I joke that I'm like a translator for the engineers to the auditors and the auditors to the engineers, because I understand and really enjoy the technical aspect. And quite often the engineers would say, you should have been an engineer. You should be an engineer. And finally, one of them asked me, why aren't you an engineer? You think like an engineer. You work like an engineer. You lay everything out. And I had to think about his question for a while. And as I sat there thinking, I went, honestly, I didn't know I could be an engineer. I didn't know that that was an option for me. I was the first person in my family to go to college. Nobody helped me fill out any of the forms. Nobody knew what any of these forms were. For my grandparents, there was a language barrier. It was a multicultural household. And so I didn't know any engineers. I couldn't even tell you as a young person what an engineer did fully. I knew they built things. And so that's what I mean by representation matters. I didn't know that was an option for me. And so I'm pretty sure that if you were to go into any barrio, which means a Latino neighborhood or any ethnic neighborhood, you would, and you asked them, have you ever thought about going into cybersecurity? They would look at you like, what is that? Maybe if you said hacker, that might really ring a bell, and they'd be like, oh, that sounds cool, But I have colleagues a colleague who's an engineer. He is Latino, and he stumbled into it as well, just like I did. He got caught graffitiing. He had to do community service at the library, and it just so happened there was a programmer who was volunteering there who taught him how to program. And so he and I worked together on multiple nonprofit projects because the pipeline, we have to get to the talent. We can't wait for the talent to come to us. So One of the calls to action to all cybersecurity professionals is I say, work with your communities, work with people, work with nonprofits to get in front of this talent. It's not about having a fancy degree. It's about really finding smart, innovative, creative people. I guarantee you all those cyber criminals don't have fancy degrees, and they're doing wonders to destroy our environment. So the risk is huge, and for cybersecurity, it just gets more massive if we don't decide to change. But when we look at it from the perspective of reward, it's incredibly, there's so much to gain here, not only for the safety of our teams and for the companies and the data that we're protecting and our customers and our our citizens when we're looking at it from a government level, but also personally, right? We get the opportunity to grow as people along with these teams. So I might have talked a little quick through this, but I would love to encourage anybody, if they have any questions, to please feel free to step up to the mic and ask me any questions. But yeah, that was pretty much my conversation on this. And if anybody's interested, there was an amazing amount of sources that I have, so if anybody's interested in that, I'd be happy to connect and provide those links to those sources and all these stats. It's pretty staggering when you start going through cyber criminal stats and when you start seeing the disparity in workforces and how they run and how many women, and the fact that we can't even measure differently abled people. It's pretty wild. Oh. No, it's okay. Yeah. Is it on?
It's not working. It's not. Oh, okay. Right now it's working. Okay. So yeah. So what is the main reason that it so happened actually that there is no diversity and so on? What is
I don't think there's a single answer, but I know one of them is a barrier to reaching, like I talked about. So I grew up in a financially challenged family. We grew up poor. So I didn't necessarily have access to a computer all the time. If you grow up with, parents that are college educated, then you have a great head start. You have people, you definitely have a computer in your house. You probably have people who can help you to the college process and encourage you to look at different careers. And if you have, family members who are in tech, it makes it easier. So when you think of the tech workforce right now, it is changing, but when you see a lot of Caucasian males and they're having children, they're going to encourage their children to look at different things, but their children are going to see, oh, my mom or my dad works in tech. I might go into tech. Maybe I'll look at a different sector. And that's why I say the representation matters. When I gave my example, we didn't have a computer in my house, and the only computer I had access to was the ones at school, all the way through college. So that's definitely one of the barriers that we see. Also, there's a tendency, and this is just a human tendency, to want to be surrounded by people who look the same as them. And because there's a comfort there, there's a culture comfort there. And so when you don't feel comfortable in an environment, maybe you're like, no, I'll go over here. It's kind of like when you notice when children go to a dance, all the boys gravitate to one side and all the girls gravitate to the other. It's just a human tendency and something we have to mix up. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I agree with you in just but how we can solve it. That's the problem. It's clear.
Yes, so solving it, that's why I say we have to reach out and we have to push ourselves as individuals beyond our comfort zone. We have to stop and look around and say, oh, do I see too much sameness? Especially if the sameness is your own. Like I've been in environments where I was completely surrounded by females and there's an imbalance, and a male counterpart is going to approach a problem differently. We all know that, men and women tend to approach problems differently. And neither one is right or wrong. It's just So I'll use the example of my husband. I'm sure he's going to love that. But, males tend to, at least he does, approach a problem head on. And I have a tendency to look at it from what are the different things we can do? Is there any way to circumvent this? Neither one's necessarily wrong or right, but when we come together and we collaborate on something that is partially direct and partially, we can circumvent something, it helps. So it's really about us pushing ourselves out of our own comfort zones, being more observant about the lack of diversity we see, regardless of what it is, and trying to understand our own personal biases, because they all exist, and we all have them, and it's a self-improvement thing. And I think of a wonderful quote by a social biologist named Dr. O.E. Wilson, who said, we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. And that kind of sums it up. We're still just people that have to deal with these very raw emotions. We have these institutions that have been like this for so long. We need to make sure that the problems and the errors and the biases and the prejudice that are built into those institutions don't move forward into our godlike technology. Thank you.